For all candidates, and this is on behalf of Lauren Head, the current Vice President, so I'm just going to quote her. One of the central jobs of the executive positions is to manage the SRC as an organization. This means understanding how it functions through and through, while constantly looking for ways to improve it. Given this job and the importance of the Student Association's constitution to the SRC's mandate, what do you think is the most important amendment for people to pay attention to in the upcoming referendum? What is your position on it, and why?
One of the amendments is to fund the Mark newspaper with $4,000 a year for the SRC, and I think that is so important because the thing that the Mark does on the campus is promote really important dialogue, as well as providing an outlet for people to organize and to express themselves and get involved in the community. Promotes important dialogues, and it needs to be financially sustainable. The amendment also has some other really cool things about it, like it requires that the two organizations, the SRC and the Mark, stay independent, and that the Mark have a constitution that has that built in.
Within the amendment in the preamble is the actual role of the SRC, and one of my favorite lines within that preamble is the role of the SRC is to promote student morale and interaction. And I am a huge supporter of this because within the executive position, I think that should be our first goal, is to provide student morale and interaction.
I think one of the most important amendments is the one that's introducing two new ministers to the SRC, a Minister of Human Rights and a Minister of Health and Wellness. I personally think these are both really good additions to the SRC to help encompass more of the Quest community, especially the health and wellness one. I think that's a really important issue to bring up more on campus.
I think a very important amendment is the one related to paying the SRC members and treating it as a campus job. I think it's very important. I started off by rejecting that idea and thinking that SRC members should do their job out of commitment from the first place as they ran for the position initially. Then I came to realize that with SRC members committing to different activities around campus, maybe by being an SRC member, that might prevent them from getting a campus job or getting an off-campus job. So I think it's a positive step forward with maintaining the passion and commitment of the SRC members to their jobs.
Lauren's put us in a little bit of a difficult position because I think there's lots of important amendments. But to add something new to the conversation, I'll bring up the Constitutional Judiciary Advisory Committee. I still don't have the acronym right, but I know what it does. And I think this is really important because it helps the SRC be accountable to its constitution. So students can come forward and say, I don't think that you're acting according to your mandate, or I don't think that you've been fulfilling what's been laid out for you in terms of the objectives, and I think that that's something that's missing right now and can definitely help make the SRC more accountable. Obviously, I think that it'll go through an amendment process and that there's small kind of changes to be made, so I don't think the amendment as is I would support, but I think the idea is really beneficial and would help make the SRC more accountable.
Unfortunately, Celine just stole my thunder, but either way, the Student Judiciary Committee, I think, is another way of just engaging people and getting students just basically finding ways in which they can make a profound impact. I think sometimes, we just think, well, I have to be on the SRC to make some profound impact or make a proposal. But creating a diversity of ways in which people can engage and communicate, especially in terms of ways of enforcing accountability, will be very important as we move on into the future.
I'm a stickler for bad spelling and hazy phrasing. I appreciate Graham Fisher so much for helping to reduce the amount of poor spelling in this constitution.
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a particular amendment that I'm really excited about. If I remember correctly, though, this current constitution was written in 2012, and I think it really does need to be updated, especially with the school growing and there's so many things changing. So it'll be really great to see what the finished project is and how it moves forward.
So I'd like to continue the tradition of asking each candidate, I should say, a tough question. And so I'll start with Kyle, who I appreciate the support. I have to start with someone. Kyle, you mentioned in your interview with The Echo that you're not better than any other presidential candidate. You have no discernible platform and have been to very few SRC meetings. Why should students vote for you?
If they think that I'm going to take them in a direction that they want to go. I'm not a politician. I'm not the standard candidate. I am running because I'm offering myself to my community, to represent my community, if that is what they want. But that is up to you guys to decide.
Celine, you've been the SRC's concentration minister for the past year. Leading subcommittee meetings on academics and leading an entire organization are importantly different things. Experience on the SRC is a start, but what specifically makes you qualified to take on the role of SRC president?
I think that moving beyond my experience on the SRC is really beneficial, but that it also shouldn't be negated. So I'll at least leave it at that. But I think experience with a lot of different groups and organizations on campus. So being a new member of the FRT team, being a peer tutor for the past 2 years, attending several different club events, being a member of the Global Issues Network since my first year. So being able to interact with those different parts of campus. Although this is related to my experience on the SRC, I've established a good relationship with the administration through that, particularly with Ryan, and I think that's really beneficial for a presidential candidate.
Sydney, in your interview with the Echo, you mentioned flexible space and the hub. Last year, you ran for SRC president campaign on the same Let's Build a Hub platform. This year, the SRC has discussed the need for an on-campus pub and student space in SRC meetings with David, with Melanie, and countless students have brought proposals to us. SRC and students alike have put a lot of effort to trying to get such a project off the ground. But neither the SRC nor the school has enough money to start or finish the project, which you would know if you had attended a single SRC meeting in the last year and a half. How can you reasonably expect students to vote for you to lead an organization that you know little about on a platform promise that you cannot possibly fulfill?
Unfortunately, I think you may have misrepresented the fact that I have been there and was there for the first half of last year as the chairperson of the SRC. And so in many ways, it's not as if I am totally ignorant of what goes on in the SRC. And yes, last year I did run a similar sort of platform. And in many ways, I spent basically after losing, really trying to take some time as to reflect on what were my fundamental values and what were the things that were real fundamental impediments to seeing the change that we more or less all seem to see as being important. You've demonstrated this by saying that there's lots of people who are all thinking about this and trying to make proposals for it. And so in many ways I've tried to temper my expectations and temper basically the claim that we should go out and get a pub because obviously the funds aren't there. But what I do think is we have to consider the multitude of different options that we can bring to the table. And basically expressing a clear sort of delineation of support for those types of events. Because people have thought of really fascinating things, such as using storage containers, for example, just to create a space, which would be significantly cheaper than any of the alternatives that we might have thought of. And so in many ways, allowing that creativity and supporting that creativity will be fundamental to ensuring that work happens.
I mentioned in an interview with the Echo newspaper last week that emphasizing the connection between the SRC and students has been done before. The SRC by default is always interested in finding new ways to build community and get students involved with the community and the SRC. It's not a new promise. Can you tell me what else you're going to bring to the SRC and why that separates you from the rest of the candidates?
I think part of it is my experience working in administrative positions before. Throughout high school, I held 2 jobs, one of it which was working on the insurance and the taxes for an office building, and the other one was being an assistant manager at a seasonal pool. So I have had that work in the sort of the grunt work behind the organization and making an organization run. So I think that's part of what I'm going to bring that's really going to be different than any other candidate.
Amar, remembering a story about every person is an interesting campaign angle, but stories about students don't necessarily translate into skills you need to lead a dynamic group of students. Everyone wants to connect with the SRC and students, but you as a student have not connected with the SRC this year. You haven't attended an SRC meeting most of the year. Why should students elect you to help lead an organization that you are not involved in?
Again, I mentioned the whole point of being a student representative within the organization. It's true that I haven't been to an SRC meeting, but I'm definitely involved in other aspects of student life on campus. And And by student life, I don't mean the official, like I work with student affairs or something. I'm with students. I hear from students. I have lunches and dinners and hang out with different social circles at school. So I feel that I have this ground feel for what the students want or what they might want in the future based on my interaction with pretty much every social circle in school, at the school. Also, I don't get my role until if I get elected until next year. So I think I have half a year to study the SRC well and the dynamics of the SRC and how it works. I'm sorry.
Maria, in your Echo newspaper interview, you said that if you were elected VP, you'd be the best at it. And I'm sure everyone else feels similarly, and I'm curious, what exactly are you going to bring to the SRC this year that other candidates wouldn't?
I believe that I'm going to bring the SRC to the students. I think that we are all very busy with our clubs and with schooling, and I want us to be accessible to you guys. I don't want you guys to have to put effort in. We are elected and we are representing you, so we will come to you.
You said in an interview with the Echo, there's the trend, the Echo. You said in your interview with the Echo that you have experience with the SRC, student affairs, and administration. Describe to me one experience that's not dancing bear with these groups, and what skills you bring, what skills you will bring from those experiences to the SRC, and why it makes you a better VP candidate than other candidates.
I think what I bring to the as representing the SRC and working as a student representative with those other groups is confidence and professionalism and social skills, problem-solving skills, logical thinking skills, planning skills, general thinking skills, and social skills. Yeah.
Skills. Generally, you stole my question for Kyle, and now I'm put on the spot. Kyle, you've been doing Community Update for the past year. You've been a member of the athletics team since you've been at Crust. What exactly is it from those experiences do you think are going to help you as the VP next year on the SRC?
Yeah, so I was a member of the women's soccer, well, I am a member of the women's soccer team Community Update, and then also worked as a research assistant and other on-campus jobs. So in terms of being on a sports team and athletics teams, I see some athletes out there and many other students that I'm sure have been part of different teams in the past. Being part of a team, just in general, has really allowed me to develop skills in order to work together. And like I said in my speech, I want the ministers to be able to work cooperatively, and the same with students and the SRC engagement as well. So I think that in terms of being on the soccer team, I'll bring that dynamic that I've had the experience of working on a team before. From Community Update, I like to be able to communicate with people, and I'm comfortable doing that, and I think that at Community Update that kind of exemplifies that characteristic. And then as a research assistant, that's the other side of it. That's really being able to get down and work with the details and kind of take care of business. So I think that in all three of those roles, that's what I will bring.
As you have mentioned, you're interested in getting students more involved in initiatives, some more specifically about helping students learn how to get funding. And I'm wondering, what are your plans for strategic financial planning? So, not just supporting students to take funding out of the SRC, but also ways of thinking about long-term funding, and as the student body grows, supporting long-term projects and short-term events.
For me as a vice president, I'm a fundraiser and an entrepreneur before for being a student because I never wanted to be a student really. So, and I guess it's about having the mindset of an entrepreneur or a fundraiser. I have a lot of experience with fundraising and financial sustainability of organizations. So I believe that this is going to help me very much put solid plans for adding financial sustainability to the organization, to the SRC.
So if I understood your question correctly, it was about how we think we should manage the tension between funding projects and still making sure the SRC has money for sustaining long-term initiatives. Is that right? Essentially?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think for one thing, we just say first of all, the SRC has about $110,000 to spend each year, and that's money that will be increasing. And I think that we've been making some really good investments in things like, well, there's an amendment proposed for like sustaining the mark with a $4,000 a year fund. And I think that that kind of thing can definitely coexist with shorter term initiatives too. And I think that there are usually very high standards for the kinds of initiatives that are funded by the SRC. They have to be well planned and well organized. So I think that limits frivolous spending significantly.
I also think that highlights on the VP role in importantly being a liaison between the ministers and the VP and the rest of the SRC. So really working with the financial affairs minister to make sure that everyone understands where the money's going, how much we have left.
And I think it's important to not only encourage proposals, but encourage really smart proposals and well thought out proposals from students. And then as a member of the SRC, looking at the proposals that are really going to affect the student body and how they're going to affect the student body and how much of the student body they're going to affect when we're looking at what to fund and how much to fund them for.
And that, for me, it goes to say that it's not to discourage people for applying and getting people to have proposals that they bring forward and such. I mean, that's what you want. You want to have as many awesome ideas as you can possibly have. That's not to say that everyone's going to work on the first time and in the first year in your first go round of it. So I think it's still getting people involved and wanting to try these initiatives and things, but it's not going to say that everything's going to go through. So that would kind of be the balance.
I talked a little bit about encouraging student-led initiatives, and I think to me, when I say that, it means both things. It means encouraging everyone to think about what kind of things they can give back to this community, but also providing the support from the SRC to help those students and providing the resources and opportunities to make proposals that for events or clubs or projects that will last and have the support of the SRC and maybe the help of talking to a minister about your proposal along the process rather than just coming to a meeting and dealing with all these questions that will inevitably arise.
Just to touch on that, I guess. Generally speaking, the SRCs have wanted to save about $20,000 at the end of each year to pass on to future SRCs. So kind of exploring the ways in which you can earmark funds of that sort into something that could last into perpetuity, ultimately giving you returns on investment, for example. But basically planning it, and so that you know that that's where you can that's where it should go towards. Is something that I'd like to think about. You also have to keep in mind that SRCs will change year to year, and so sometimes longer-term initiatives are quite difficult to maintain because future SRCs may not necessarily share the same views. So being able to find ways in which can we change the Constitution, for example, to kind of facilitate that would be something that I'd like to consider.
We're a small and a new school. It's kind of hard to gauge how much we spend every year. It's been variable. We have accumulated twice as much as we take in every semester, so like $55,000 a semester, and we have double that. I think that there is a way to appropriately manage the money that we have saved so that it can be used for future generations, future classes, because that isn't just our money. That's money that people paid in the past. And so how can we do them a service as well as benefit us? That's something that I've tried to tackle in Democracy and Justice, and it's a big problem. I mean, it's a big slice of pie.
For any reason, it seems that it's extremely painful and unnecessarily so. Before I vote, I need to know how you, as a representative of me, a student, can help me better to have an improved housing situation.
So after talking with Lauren, she said that one of the things she's really worked on this year is building that relationship between student affairs. And that's where this kind of change would begin, is through student affairs and having to have that there. So I think that that's something that should be discussed further, and it's also something that hasn't been encountered in the same way in the past because we haven't had as many students, and there isn't as much difficulty when there were vacant spots and different things like that. So I think to continue with the initiative that Lauren has started in terms of working with student affairs and making that more of a possibility.
I completely agree with Kyle. I think it's going to come from that communication with student affairs and really working with them to figure out what issues you guys are facing in the moves and seeing how we can fix that and how student affairs and the SRC can both help contribute to making that a smoother process for you guys.
So to be honest, I personally haven't heard many complaints about that process yet, but I'm really interested to hear about yours. So I think for me the first step would be to understand what the problem is, because I'm not even really sure about that, specifically like in the moving process. Could you actually say just right now, is it like the moving of stuff, the interaction with student affairs?
It seems to be like where people are being placed and how the people in charge of student housing go about placing people.
Thanks.
What I was going to say was closely mirrors what Ben said and what I brought up in my speech, which was that I'd like to have more forums for discussion on these types of, like these problems that are significant aspects of our student life here. And I would see something like the bursary discussion where we have members maybe from student affairs, but also students there, so that they can hear and the SRC can hear what students think and their feedback on that process all at once, but also hear from student affairs as to what their thoughts were or what their process was. So kind of a two-way information that we can gather student opinion, but also hear from student affairs kind of what their side of the story is in terms of that problem.
Fascinating question. In particular, we have to consider that student affairs is trying to deal with that alongside many of its other various sorts of responsibilities. So clarifying the ways in which we can communicate is obviously a good way of doing that. You brought up though also just how people are organized and put together into their rooms. And that's sort of arbitrary right now. But it'd be interesting to kind of look particularly at what Caleb did with course selection. It's something where basically he made it so that it wasn't so inequitable. And in his summer fellowship project, you can actually read up on a number of ways in which people actually learn it for rooming situations. So potentially incorporating that or looking at that possibility and introducing it to student affairs and their consideration of housing situations might also be a very interesting way to kind of address it.
I would 100% represent your views and talk to student affairs. I'm not exactly sure what the student affairs side of this issue is, and I think it's important to take all sides into account. Obviously, there's lots of people that want to move around, but there's only so many spaces, and our school's getting bigger. So it's hard to know how to deal with that problem yet, but it's communication.
First, I think we need to make sure that you understand the problem the right way before we address it. So, I mean, just from knowing what's happening on campus, I know that Jessica Els, Shane, and Dexter Robson requested that they move to an empty room in North, and that happened super smooth. So, and I don't think this happens to any of the upperclassmen, I mean second, third, and fourth years, because they get to choose who to live with. I think it's mainly a problem they do first years, especially first years who have trouble in the first few months of living on campus with their roommates or the rooming situation. So I think it comes down to being on the ground and seeing what's happening. And I mean, if you come to me and I'm a member of the SRC, I would go personally and understand what's the exact problem and be basically the middleman between you and the student affairs, and just try to facilitate this process in a way where you both have very good understanding of what's happening. Because sometimes it's said students have this concern, but it's actually one student. Sorry.
To highlight on what Amar said, it's important in our executive roles to be a liaison not only with administration, but also with the students. And in situations like this is where this becomes very crucial. And I think that I can offer a very good means of this. I represented my high school in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade as being the liaison between the students and the Calgary School Board. So I took the students' issues, put them into terms that represented them fully, and then could be presented to the school board. So I think it's the ability to do that in your situation that will yield the best outcome.
So one of the things that really impressed me with some of the speeches, mainly Ben's and some of Kyle's, is the integrating sort of, or being very clear that you've made an effort to know what goes on in the SRC and you engage with people. And I don't want to ask an all students question. I'm going to ask specifically Sydney, if this year have you had any what efforts have you made to either, one of your big platforms was Student Affairs Connection, So I'm wondering two things, you can answer both of them. If you've made any connection to talk to the current president to get what that role fully entails, and if you've talked to student affairs, because I think introducing yourself to student affairs, if that's going to be a platform that you run on, is an important thing to do. So simple question is if you've done that yet.
So yeah, first off, I'm the emergency first responder co-coordinator. So I actually have basically a responsibility to communicate effectively with Kim of student affairs. In addition, basically I took time out today, for example, also just to talk with Melanie, to talk about prospects like this. And actually, in many ways, she was the one who suggested that this was something she was wondering why we didn't do this ourselves, which is basically having a student affairs person basically at SRC meetings so that proposals would go through much faster. And lastly, I didn't necessarily reach out directly to Graham, but I have reached out to Lauren in particular because some of the things that came up with her platform were regarding communication and effectively facilitating communication with the administration and student affairs. And I got her opinion.
Okay, so my question is aimed towards Amar. So you mentioned how you're involved in many different organizations and ventures and all this stuff outside of Quest, as well as communicating with students inside of Quest. So based upon the amount of time I'm sure many students have seen you doing these things, do you effectively think you have the time to fulfill the vice president role? And if not at this moment, what are you willing to give up in order to effectively represent the students?
I have all the time in the world. Maybe my ventures and stuff, all things that happen online, because I'm following up from far distance. My ventures happen during the summer, so it's not really, this is something that doesn't run throughout the year. TEDx, it's a seasonal thing. We just finished our last event. Next event is going to be next year, and I mean later in the year, this summer. So I mean, I really have time, and that's why I ran first.
So this question is for all the candidates. Kyle, you mentioned specifically in your speech that the vice president and the president are going to have a very close relationship, whoever it is, over the next year. You're supposed to be partners in crime, compadres. Who would you like to work with next year?
I honestly could not answer that question at this time. I think everyone has completely different things to offer, and you may think that I'm darting away from the question and things like that. But I don't know each of the presidents on a personal enough level to be able to know who I'd like to work with the best. I mean, you may know someone super well, you could have lived with them for a long time, and then you go into a class with them and realize you hate working with them on a project. So for me to be able to say who I prefer to work with at this time is not really possible, I don't think.
I think that's a really good question in highlighting on the candidate's flexibility to work with anyone. I think that if you're in this position, you should be able to work with anyone, and if there are things that you disagree on, you are in this position. It's a professional position, so you should give and take and find the best medium so that you can work with everybody. You shouldn't limit yourself to one candidate.
I think the presidential candidates we have right now are very different people, and they're all going to take these in very different directions, and so I don't think I can choose right now because I don't specifically know enough about what direction they're going to take it, and I think it's going to be working with whoever ends up being there to figure out how to make the SRC run better, and that's going to happen with whatever candidate is chosen.
I mean, for me, I know the three candidates on a personal level. It varies. Because I've worked in a lot of ventures before, and I've had experience working with the team, so I know what kind of person motivates me the best to work. Because I am more of a thinker, so I always need a doer to work along with me. And I mean, from just knowing all three candidates, I believe that Celine keep you disciplined and. Be a great listener, but a doer as well.
mentions of my name on that side. In addition to the reasons that people kind of highlighted for not choosing someone in particular, I don't think, given actually how restrictive our election campaign rules are, I should be using this stage to proclaim any particular vice presidential candidate this time.
Well, I think I'd work with Ben the best. Just because I think we have a good relationship and I think he's got the energy to fucking move. I see him run everywhere. But I don't think that's to devalue any of the other candidates. I think I could work well with all of them. That's just, we already have a very good relationship, which is why I have said his name.
Funny thing is I think that each of them have very distinct strengths. And so using them effectively will probably be the best indicator of success that we have. So that comes with working together and exploring those strengths. If I were to say one person in particular, I think Kyle has probably the most sort of strengths that would complement mine. I think she knows that she wants to get into the nitty-gritty, and I think that's fundamentally important. To have a person who knows about that and wants to start getting into it. So that's basically ending my
Thank you. This question is for you. You mentioned in your platform that caring was a particular passion of yours, or something that you wanted to accomplish. And you said caring in terms of fixing people's mistakes. And I remember that last year you wanted a pub because you wanted to hold people accountable for their behavior. So do you have a kind of moral ground that you want us to adhere to, or are you, I'm just trying to clarify, did you want students to behave in a particular way? Because that's the message that came across to me when you were talking about caring in that way. Just some clarification.
Good question. In particular, when I think about it in terms of creating a space, and in particular when I talked about a pub, I thought that it's more about incentivizing people to make the right decisions that ultimately reflect caring in our kind of community. And that comes down to when people cause damages to the residents, when people have done stuff like that, it's ultimately basically a misjudgment, right? You've made a bad decision. And sometimes I think the challenge is how do we find places and avenues where people can basically feel like there's not for restorative justice. And I think that's one way in which I think that when I talk about caring, and I'd like that to be explored.
This is creating a student space, most notably at pub and for wine and cheeses. Both of these are no alcohol, therefore will be happening 19 or older. A good chunk of student bodies under 19, so how do you make a student space for everyone?
Good question. So there's been lots of alternatives that have been thrown around because I've heard lots of proposals actually from people outside of the community regarding stuff like pubs. And they've been able to think of ways to kind of get around this. So for example, basically if you were to have, for example, liquor laws currently are changing so that if you designate a particular space, you can actually have minors in a place where you're serving alcohol. And so that change in the liquor law would significantly help and basically make it easier for minors to be in the same space and be able to enjoy it at the same time. I guess that's as brief as I can get.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. I guess I'm probably the last person to ask a question. One thing that I think that Quest often does is that we tend to be a little insular at times. We focus so much on our own community because we have a really strong community, we have a lot to do, and we're running around, but we often don't tend to look outwards. So the question I have to ask all of you is, what links will you foster outside of the Quest community in order to make our own community stronger? That's what I say outside.
So I grew up in Whistler and I spent a lot of time in the area. I have a lot of relationships between Whistler and different places in Squamish as well. I think that engaging more in the community, I used to volunteer at the elementary school, so to get something like that going again where we can foster that relationship with young students, and children. Additionally, I was helping coach the elementary school soccer teams and had students come up here for different lessons, so there's another connection with children. I helped Andrew organize the holiday feast, and that was really successful and is continuing with Helping Hands, so it's kind of a diverse, different bit of connections that I'd be happy to continue to foster, and I can really see, especially growing up in Whistler, how much the relationship sometimes can be lacking between Quest and the other communities, even though Whistler is different from Squamish.
I think that the SRC has had some really good programs this year that have fostered connection with the outside community, and I'd like to continue programs like that. For instance, the holiday feast was a great success. People from Squamish came up, and yeah, fist bump. Also things like shuttles are great. That's something that I'm really interested in funding because it is important for people to get off the hill. I think that there are a lot of things that we can fund that will address that problem.
For this, I would want to work with the Minister of External Affairs because I know that they do have a lot of ideas, and that is their position, basically, is to connect us to Squamish, and I think it's really important not to overstep their role, or my role, into theirs. But I would really like to connect us more with the youth in Squamish because we do have such great leaders that attend Quest. I think it's important to try to bring some of those leadership skills to the students in Squamish as well. And I also want to work with the animal shelter in Squamish because who doesn't want more dogs on campus?
I think that this question highlights beautifully on the role of the VP in being able to work on small projects, big projects, help out the president, help out all of the ministers. So I think it would be really crucial to work with the Minister of External Affairs, and I ran for Minister of External Affairs last year actually, and one of my key things was to work with the students and to get them talking to their parents about how fantastic the Quest kids are. So I think if we start with the younger generations, Squamish will begin growing up with the idea that the Quest kids are a crucial part of their community.
I don't know on what scale Tori was asking his question. I mean, if it's the global scale or just like within our community, but I'll just take it a bit bigger and go to the global scale. I attend Quest on the MasterCard scholarship, and I get invited to 3 to 5 conferences every year. First one was 2 weeks ago in Washington D.C. It was at the World Bank, and I got to speak about Quest, and I could see that everyone's eyes in the room just lit up when they saw my passion talking about Quest. And I mean, the idea itself, it was enough for them to get really excited. And I lived in 3 different countries before coming to Quest. I need to answer the question. I lived in 3 countries before coming here. I have a lot of connections in different places. The chief economist of the World Bank when we talked about Quest at the World Bank, he showed interest in coming to see Quest and maybe be a guest speaker at some point. So I feel I have the outreach globally to make very strong connections with others, not just the community of Squamish.
I'm going to also go on that theme. I think there's really important things in terms of links with Squamish, but and maybe this is tinged by my work this year as a concentration representative and my personal ambitions, but I've been talking to the Chancellor and talking to David a lot about how we can make it easier for Quest students to go on to professional schools and to go on to grad schools, and I think this is a big part of it. It's maybe not immediately seen as an SRC responsibility, but I think it's something that really concerns students even now coming to Quest, and so it was one of my concerns coming in, and so that's something that I'd like to really emphasize is links with the outside community and the outside academic community in that way.
Pointing out also that there's actually a Squamish local events coordinator, I believe, who's part of the student affairs team. And so they also play a role in attempting to kind of facilitate and encourage those types of things. And so if you have a transparent dialogue with them about basically what students want so that they can more or less try and to cater to those types of things, obviously then there's an opportunity for us to grow a lot more in terms of what we contribute. But there already are a significant number of different student initiatives like Rotaract, for example, who make efforts to go out and engage and volunteer their time. And so perhaps in many ways it's another way just like trying to expand and communicate the ways in which students can get involved and so that they know.
I think that the relationship between Quest and Squamish is incredibly important. It's important that we are on good grounds, and I want to help nurture and encourage that relationship. Mainly, I guess, Quest holds a lot of events for Squamish, for the Squamish community, and so I think it's important to make sure that those are still accessible, and to, I guess, to make sure that the student community interaction, Squamish community interaction, is as positive as possible.
Are there more questions?